Hello everyone, I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building the Super Chief 2 two-stage scale model rocket produced by Rocketarium. Now this is an updated kit. So about 2 years ago, I guess, I made a video for the Super Chief 2 as well. And since then, Rocketarium has updated the instructions and parts of the kit, and so the owner asked me to do an updated video. So if you have a kit that's just been sitting in your build pile for the last few years, you probably want the other video that's available on this channel. If you bought it recently, then this is probably the video you want. So let's go ahead and open this up. Alright, first thing we want to do is find the instructions, which will have the parts list. And be careful, you may have other things folded up in here as well, like decals and such. Alright, so let's find our parts list here. Alright, so first of all, let's check the decals here. Alright, we have the United States decal, the logo decal there, all of the white adhesive bands and the hatch cover, the copper bands, the brown bands, and the silver bands. Okay, so those are all of the decals there. Alright, we have a parachute. Okay, and then two sets of fins. These are for the booster, and these are for the sustainer. Alright, we have two engine mount sub-assemblies here. And this is somewhat rare in that it mixes engine types. So the booster uses a 24mm engine, the sustainer uses an 18, and this uses gap staging. It works really well. I have my older Super Chief 2, and it's a really great flyer, and it's a perfect example of how gap staging is supposed to work. Alright, then we've got 3 body tubes here, and there's stuff inside one of them. Alright, and actually there's a coupler down inside this one. So if you're looking for that, okay, so that's those 3 there. We've got all those. Okay, our nose cone. Alright, motor tube. And this is the elongated motor tube that we'll need for the booster stage. Okay, a glue applicator, that's this guy here. You may want more than one of these, but that gives you one. Okay, and then we've got a ejection baffle sub-assembly. And then in this bag we've got the shock cord, the launch lugs, and some little trim pieces there. Alright, and it looks like we have everything we're supposed to have. So I'm going to clean this up and we will get started. Our first assembly here is for the sustainer motor mount. So just open up the little small parts bag here. Okay, and there's a spacer that's probably stuck inside the motor mount tube. You're going to need to pull that out. So according to the instructions, the first thing we're going to do is put a ring of glue at 3/4 of an inch from one end, and that will become the forward end. And this is one of the things you can use your applicator for here. So I'm going to measure 3/4 of an inch with my thumbnail there. Okay, and now I'm going to take my wood glue, apply that to the end here. Okay, and I'm going to stick this in the forward end till my thumb hits, and I'm just going to move it around a little bit. Okay, so you should have glue down inside there. Okay, and then from the aft end, we're going to insert the small green ring here. That's our engine block. All right, and then this spacer. All right, insert the spacer and then just push up, and then immediately remove the spacer again. And you'll notice here that pushes the glue up in front of the engine block ring and forms its own fillet there. So that'll be nice and strong once it's dry. Okay, so now I'm going to mark the other end of this, so the end without the ring, as aft, just so I don't get mixed up later on. Okay, and then we need a mark at 7/8 of an inch, or 23 millimeters from the aft end. There's 23 millimeters. Okay, and then also measuring from the aft end, and I'm going to offset it a little bit here. Get the aft end going the right way. Alright, so here we need a 70 millimeter mark, and this is where our engine clip will attach. Okay, so at that mark, we're going to cut about a 3 millimeter or 1/8 of an inch slit. Now if you're feeling a lot of resistance, it means you're just hitting the engine block, so just come up a little bit. Alright, and so with my knife in there, you can see it's right at the engine block. So go ahead and pull that back out, and then you can put the right angle bend here of the engine clip into that slot, so that now it is right above the engine block. Okay, and then we have this dark gray, almost black ring. I'm going to dry fit this here initially, and it's going to go down until we get to the mark we made there. So I'm going to bring this back up a little bit. I'm just going to run a bead of glue around it. Doesn't have to be very heavy. This is not a particularly strain-bearing part. It just holds the engine clip in place so it doesn't wobble side to side. Alright, and I'm just going to kind of twist that in until I get to the mark that I made there. Okay, and we'll just set that for a moment while we go on to the next part here. Okay, so now we have two rings, one of which has a large notch in it, the other one has a smaller notch in it. Okay, the one with the large notch is going to go over the engine clip here and will rest up against the gray ring. And then the one with the smaller notch is going to go just at the beginning there of the engine clip and will help hold it in place. Alright, so those are going on okay. If you're having trouble getting these on, you may need to sand a little bit the inside of this. Okay, so here again I'm going to run a bead of glue, this time right above or forward of that gray ring. Alright, take my large notched ring again. I'm actually going to put it on, yeah, we'll go this way. It's got a little bit finer finish on this side, so I'm going to stick that toward the open end of the rocket here. Alright, so that's going to kind of squish in there, and now I'm just going to fill that in, make a fillet out of that with my finger. Okay, and then you can do the same thing on the interior surface there, because this is a load-bearing part. This is going to be taking a lot of the thrust, so we like to have that nice and strongly glued into place. Okay, and then for the forward ring, we're going to run a bead of glue just forward of the engine clip there. Okay, and same way, you're not going to see either one of these sides, so however you want to do it. All right, so I'm going to slide that just until we get over the engine clip there. All right, try to get that as perpendicular as you can, and then once more, go ahead, make a fillet on both sides. Alright, and so now I'm just going to set this aside and let it dry completely before we put it into the body tube. Now we're not done with motor mounts though, because now we need to do the booster assembly. I'm just going to shift this over here. Okay, so for this one you'll need this long engine mount tube, and on this the perforated end here is the forward end. Alright, but I'm going to go ahead and mark the aft end anyway, just to help avoid mistakes. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and open up the small parts package here. Alright, we're going to measure 89 millimeters or 3.5 inches. From either end. I'm going to just go ahead and do it from the aft end here. So that is going to be right here at 89 millimeters. Okay. Now, it says here use the included balsa stick. That's not there anymore. That's what this applicator is for. Okay, so kind of the same way we did with the other one is I'm going to apply glue to this. Alright, and then we're going to measure that same distance again. Oops, dropping a little glue there. Alright, so now we're going to measure up about 89 there. And I've got my thumbnail again at that point. And so now I'm going to insert this, put it up against the side when it hits my thumbnail, alright, and rotate that glue around in there. And then we're going to take the green thrust ring, right here, insert that into the aft end, and then we'll need the larger yellow spacer here. Okay, we're going to insert that, and just like we did before, we'll just push that up. And you won't be able to see it as easily in the video, but you'll feel it as it hits the glue there. Okay, and then pull this out right away so you don't accidentally glue it in. Alright, now we need some more little measurements here. Clean up that little bit going first. Okay, so now we need a mark at 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch from the aft end. This is going to be right there. And then another mark at 25 millimeters or 1 inch right there. Okay, and these are going to be the set points for 2 of the rings. And then another mark at 95, and I'm going to offset this one because this is going to be the mark for the engine retainer. So that's going to be right there and should be right on top of the engine block. Okay, so just like we did with the sustainer, we're now going to cut a 3 millimeter or 1/8 of an inch wide slit there. All right. If you're feeling it hit that ring, just creep up a little bit. Almost there. There we go. Okay. And this is a longer clip, but it works in the same way. So take the right angle bend there, pop that through. Okay, and then we've got another dark gray ring here. That's going to fit over. and that will end up at that mark. Okay, now I haven't put any glue on here yet. Alright, the centering ring that has the larger notch, that is going to go on the aft end, and that should have that 6mm mark there. Okay, and then like we did on the other one, the forward centering ring will just go down just to cover the clip like that. Okay, so everything's fitting, and again, if it's too tight, use a little sandpaper to open that up. Alright, so once again here, I'm going to add a bead of glue, go around, and I'm going to slide the ring into the glue, kind of turning it as I go until I reach my mark. Okay, and then I'm going to pull, actually I'll just take off that aft centering ring for a moment. Alright, and here the bead of glue is going to go right at the same level as that line, so that we're pushing it forward again. Okay, and now I'm just again going to push that forward. Now I just noticed my clip is a little bit out of parallel though, so you can shift that as you're doing this. Alright, and now I'm just going to push this up till I see my mark once more. There's my mark right there. Okay, make sure that's pretty perpendicular, and again I'm going to make a fillet here. Try not to get glue on the clip here. If you do, once it dries, you should be able to lift it off anyway, as the glue shouldn't grab the clip very well. You can also put a fillet here on the outside. Again, try to keep the glue off of the clip and out of the notch there. Alright, and just take your finger and fill that in. Okay, and then the same thing up here. I'm going to start my glue just above the clip so that I'm pushing the ring through it. Okay, and then we'll just push that in till it just comes back. Okay, so you should just see a little bit of the clip there. Alright, once more we're going to fillet this in, and this time it doesn't matter if you get any glue on the clip itself. Alright, make that perpendicular as much as we can. Okay, and then once more apply a fillet to the other side. And smooth it in. Alright, so that one is done and just needs to dry as well. For the next part, we're going to identify the body tubes here. And also, you still have this little piece that was in the motor mount bag. This is an adapter, so that if you're using 24 by 70 millimeter motors like the SD's C11 and D series, you'll need this in front of the motor to keep the motor from shifting around. If you're using E motors by SD's or F motor, well, I guess the black powder only goes up to E, or if you're using composite motors, you don't need to have this. I just keep these in my launch box. Alright, so one of the changes that this kit has over the old one is that the fins and launch lug areas are pre-marked with light laser cuts here. Okay, and so here we've got fin lines. The launch lug line is just a little bit wider, okay, but the fin lines are longer here. So this is the 12.5-inch tube. And this we're just going to call the main tube now, and I'm going to write it on the inside. Alright, and then we're going to go to the next part. Alright, then we have the 7-inch tube here, and it's got fin marks, and it's got little tiny holes here. Alright, this will be where we'll put in some vent holes later on. Fin marks down here, and on the inside of this one at the aft end, this is going to be our booster. And then the smallest one, the 5-inch one here, this is going to be our forward tube. And this is what will contain the recovery system. Okay? And on all of these, I've written that on the aft end, just in case we need to differentiate between the two. Alright, so we'll set those aside for the moment. We'll come back to them here in just a little bit. Alright, next we're going to put the baffle together. Okay, after opening up the parts, you should have a coupler, a screw eye, and 2 perforated plates here. And the first thing we're going to do is take the screw eye here, and I'm going to thread it into the hole in the middle of one of the baffle plates. Alright, just enough so that the full diameter now shows, not just the tapered part. I'm going to back that back out. Alright, and I'll put just a squirt of glue there on top of it. Alright, and then once more, run that in. Okay, I'm going to twist this all the way up until I get to just below the last thread there. I don't want it to go all the way up to smooth metal or it will not hold as well. Okay, so about there. On the back side here, I'm going to surround the screw with glue to give it a stronger anchor there. All right, just kind of smooth that in. You don't need an entire great big blob. So remove any blobs. Okay, and so we're going to start then with a thick ring of glue right inside the coupler here. Make sure it's contiguous. Alright, and then we're going to put the smaller baffle plate with the smaller pattern on it. That's going to go right into here. Alright, I'm just going to put that down and squish it inward so that it's going to be flush there. Alright, and then we're going to move this inward just a little bit, like a millimeter or two. Alright, and then I'm going to run another ring of glue there, just a very light one. But this way it's strengthened from both sides. Alright, now if you're getting up on the outside of the coupler, go ahead and wipe that off or it'll be harder to put it in later on. Alright, and if we look on the inside, we've got a really thick gob of glue in there, which if you want, we can just move that around. Okay, so now we're going to put a bead of glue on the other end. And if you want to be extra safe with this, you can let the first end dry for 10 minutes or so. This is pretty sticky wood glue, so I usually don't have a problem with it. Okay, so here what I'm going to do now is kind of insert this at an angle. Alright, and then I'm going to twist it as I pull it back forward. Okay, and then once again, leave yourself a millimeter or two there. Okay, and then just make a nice fillet of glue around the edges. Okay, and then if you have a lot of glue in any of those holes, you can just wipe that out with an applicator or a stick. Okay, a little bit on there is not going to hurt anything, but if you occlude all of them, you may run into difficulties later. Alright, and so now I'm going to let that dry as well. Now that the motor mounts have had time to dry, we can assemble the booster stage motor mount. And the first thing we need to do is find the blue coupler here that was not part of the baffle kit. This one's all by itself. In my kit it was actually up inside one of the body tubes. Okay, but we're going to mark halfway down the coupler at about 1 inch or 25 millimeters. Okay, and then we're going to glue that into the forward end of the booster section, and this is the end that has the two little marks that will be for the vent holes later on. So here we're just going to use some more wood glue or white glue. And I'm just going to run a bead right inside the edge of the forward end. Okay, and I'm just going to put the coupler in, and I'm just going to twist it around as I go in so that I get a nice smooth distribution of the glue there. Alright, and there's my mark right there. Okay, so that can dry. Okay, and then once this has had time to dry, we need to either punch or drill 3/16 or 4 millimeter holes at these marks. So I am going to let this dry for at least 10 minutes, and then I will drill it off camera. I've drilled the holes in the sides here, and now I'm going to take a little bit of super glue, and I'm just going to kind of let that soak into the edges to harden them. Do this on both sides. Okay, and then also down inside you can see where it's got kind of a raggedy edge where it pushed through there. Now after that super glue hardens, I can take sandpaper and just sand away the rough spots on this. Now I'm going to test fit the motor mount into the booster. So again, we're going to need the larger motor mount here. And when this is installed, the holes on the motor mount should roughly line up with the holes on the body tube here. Alright, so I'm going to dry fit this first and just make sure that we don't have anything that's going to hang up. Okay, and then when this is fully installed, it will be flush motor tube to body tube there. Okay, and again, we can look down inside there. I'm not sure if you can see that or not, but the holes are indeed lining up. So go ahead and pull it back out. We're going to need an applicator again. You can use the same one, or if you have multiple, you can get a different one. So here we're going to need a ring of glue 3.5 inches up here. So I'm going to go ahead and get my glue. Okay, and just go ahead and cover the whole applicator here. Alright, and then measuring this, okay, there's 3.5, put my finger down here. Alright, and we are going to go ahead and put a ring of glue then, all the way around there at 3.5 inches. Okay, now don't get rid of this quite yet, because now we're going to insert this approximately that far. So my forward centering ring there, we're going to push in about 1 inch or so, 2.5 centimeters. And now we're going to put another ring of glue right inside the body tube here. And if you happen to get some on the motor mount tube, it's not a big deal. Okay, and you may need more, especially if you do that. There we go. Okay, now before I shove this in, because it's probably going to grab really quickly, I'm going to look down inside. Alright, and what I'm looking for is the holes on the motor mount so that they're going to be close to the holes on the body tube. And you may not be able to see that down there. Alright, that's pretty close, and so now I'm going to go ahead and push this in. And I can recheck my holes. Now I do know they're close. And give that just a little turn if I can. Okay, and I'm going to push this down, and I'm going to use my ruler to push it flush. Okay, and I've actually got those holes almost perfectly lined up, so it's close enough there. Okay, and then if you want, you can also take and put a fillet of glue around the outside edge of the motor mount centering rings there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead to do that. And we don't have to worry about interfering with anything here because this is the truly aft end of the rocket. So nothing else will be attaching after this. There we go. Alright, and I'll just set that aside to dry. Now we're going to do the same thing with the sustainer motor mount here. Okay, and I'm just going to do a dry fit once more. Okay, and like the previous one, this is going to be flush. And I prefer to have my engine clips line up with my launch lug, so I'm going to move it around that way. Okay, now if you're having trouble getting that in, you can take a fingernail and kind of chamfer the edges outward on this, and sometimes that's enough. If it's still not fitting after that, you may need to do a little bit of sanding around the outside edge of the centering rings there. Mine's fitting just fine. Okay, and so we're going to put glue inside of this 2.5 inches up, or 63 millimeters. Okay, same procedure as before. Okay, I'm going to coat, and whoa, a little bit too much there. Coat an applicator with glue. Alright, get a rough measurement here of 2.5 inches. Alright, stick that inside and then run it around the inside of the tube. Okay, I'm going to insert this just a little bit so it's hanging there. And now, just like we did before, we're going to put some more glue on the inside edge, and then we'll push that centering ring through it. Okay, so got a little bit tighter quarters than we did with the booster. You can just kind of rotate this around. Keep spreading the glue. And then here again, I'm going to line my clip up with the launch lug lines here. Okay, I'll push that in and then use a flat edge here to make it flush. Okay. Now here I'm going to use another applicator, and I'm going to smooth out any excess glue that's in here, because this glue could cause problems with coupling of the booster stage. Alright, so if you got excess glue in there, try to wipe it out, or at least smear it around uniformly. Okay, and then once this dries, we can do a test fit of the booster stage with it. Next, I'm going to assemble the launch lugs, and so from the small parts package, you'll need the 2 launch lugs themselves, and then these 2 risers, or standoffs. And here we're just going to apply a bead of glue. just like that. And if you want, you can go ahead and just really briefly sand the launch lugs themselves. And it doesn't take much. Just take any sandpaper here and just give a few strokes on the back of the launch lug. And that's all you really need to it. Okay, and we're just going to apply the standoff here to that spot. And just center it lengthwise and widthwise. And then just let that dry. Same thing with the other one here. In fact, I'm going to, because I have it in my hand already, I'm going to apply the glue to the launch lug rather than the standoff. Either one is fine. Alright, and the same way, just center the standoff along the length and around the circumference. And let it dry as well. Now in the instructions it shows putting these on as the next step. I am going to wait on that so that I can use a fin alignment guide to help place the fins. If you put the launch lugs on before, a lot of times the lugs get in the way of fin alignment guides. Speaking of launch lug and fin attachment, I'm going to go ahead and lightly sand all of these areas here for the fins and for the launch lug. And again, it doesn't take much. You can use just about any grit of sandpaper you like. All we're doing is disrupting the glossy surface so that the glue has a better binding area. Okay, and now the next step is to treat the fins here. So we're going to either round or taper the leading edges. They recommend to taper. If you want something with a little bit stronger edge, you can round them. Okay, and here you'll also need to make a decision as to what treatments, if any, you want to give to the fins. Now these are 1/8 inch thick balsa. They're pretty heavy. But they do have a fairly deep grain to them, and so you can use either a water base or a polyurethane base sanding sealer or wood filler to help fill in that grain. You could paper the fins using either a glue-on paper laminate or a self-stick paper laminate, or you cannot do anything to them at all and just sand the surfaces. Okay, so that's going to be up to you, but now is the time to do this. Once you get them on the rocket, it's much more difficult to fill and sand the fins using those methods. One other method is to go ahead and sand them and do nothing else, put them on the rocket, but then use some fairly heavy coats of fillable sandable primer, okay, which I usually use a little bit, but not for to fill in the entire fins here. I think for mine I'm going to use a polyurethane based sanding sealer, but first I'm going to need to taper the fins. I'm going to taper the leading edges of my fins here, and then also just give a few strokes to square off the other edges and remove the soot from the cutting process. I'm using 150 grit sandpaper here. You could use 100 grit, you could use 220 grit. Just depends on how much work you want to do and how rough the surface is going to be. Okay, so after I remove the soot there, now I'm just going to start putting an angle onto this. The instructions don't specify a particular length or angle of the taper, so you can pretty much do what you want here, as long as you do it evenly on all the fins. If you get uneven tapers, you may end up with spinning rockets. Okay, and so you want to check in cross-section frequently as you go through this process. And then also make sure that you're doing this evenly, that you're not taking off too much in the front and not enough at the edge there. Okay, so if I look at this in cross section, it's getting pretty close. You can see just a little line of flatness there, and I'm going to erase that by continuing the taper. Okay, so that's pretty close. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close there. Okay, so that's really all I need on the leading edge. And then just go ahead and sand the faces here. Okay, so this fin is ready for sanding sealer. On the upper stage fins, you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to have a longer leading edge to taper here. But the other edges, again, will be squared off, and then I'll just sand the faces and then fill those as well. So I'm going to do the rest of my sanding off camera, and then we'll come back when I'm ready to apply the sanding sealer. My fins are sanded, and so now I'm going to apply this polyurethane based sanding sealer. And I've also got a piece of corrugated cardboard here. In this case it's a cheap and dirty rocket stand, but the corrugation part here is what you need. It makes a good rack for putting your fins up to dry. And then you're going to need some straight pins, and what we're going to do is just poke the pin into the root edge of the fin here. Okay, and then you can either use a paintbrush or just a cotton applicator is fine. Okay, and I'm just going to get some of the sanding sealer here, and I'm just going to cover the surface with it. Try to keep it off the root edge, but if you do get it on there, you can sand it off later. Oh, missed sanding that edge. That's okay, we'll get it too. Alright, and then when you get almost to the edge there, the pin kind of acts as a handle for you so you don't fill in your fingers quite so much. Alright, and then we'll just flip it around here and do the same thing on the other side. Okay, and then you can take the pin and just slot that into one of the corrugations on the cardboard and then leave that there to dry. Okay, I'm going to do the rest of the fins off camera. It usually takes an hour or two for this to dry enough to be sanded. And then I prefer to do a sanding after one coat very lightly and then do another coat and then sand again. You can even do more repetitions than that if you want a smoother surface. Alright, so with that, I'm going to go off camera here and do the rest of the fins. While I'm waiting for the sanding sealer to dry on the fins, I want to discuss the nose cone a little bit here. And as you can see, there's a seam on the two halves of the nose cone where this was put together. And some people don't care about that, they'll just paint over it. But if you want a smoother surface, I recommend doing a couple of things. One is simply to sand this. Okay, so what we actually have here are some areas that are raised and some areas that are depressed. And so sanding this will remove the raised areas. And then if you want to go further, you can apply some plastic model contour putty to the low areas, allow that to dry, and then sand it as well. Sanding the entire nose cone will also help the paint to stick better. So initially here I'm going to use some 150 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to use this to do the initial knockdown of any raised areas here. Okay, so start by just doing along the seam. Alright, then I'm going to turn it over and do the same thing here. Okay, and then I'm going to shift to some 220 grit sandpaper and go over that same area. Alright, and now I'm going to continue all the way around the nose cone to give it an even finish. Now I'm just going to take a tissue moistened with a little alcohol here, just to wipe that down and remove the sanding dust. Okay, and the alcohol I use just because it evaporates quickly. You can just use water. Okay, so that's taken some of the shine off of here, and usually with a couple of coats of primer and paint, that's all the sanding you really need to do. Okay, if you want a really smooth job initially, you can even move up to 320 or 400 grit and do some wet sanding. Now we can still see here there's a little bit of an indentation here and here that kind of goes up to the nose cone there. You can still see a little bit of a valley along the main seams here. Now, depending again on how precise you want your finish, you can either leave it alone and use some fillable, sandable primer, and that will fill in some of the smaller valleys there. But for this stuff up here, we've got a definite large valley. I recommend using this contour putty for plastic models. Mine is made by Testers. There are several brands out there. And so here I'm just going to squeeze this out into the region that I need it. This is non-toxic, so you can get it. You don't want to eat it, but you can use it with your fingers here to smooth that in. I'm sure it'd taste terrible if you eat it. It also dries fairly quickly, so you want to do any smoothing that you need right away, or it starts to bead up. And I'm also going to use some down here along this main seam where I've still got a little bit of depression there. Okay, we'll put some over here. Most of that seam is gone. Alright, and now you want to let this dry for 1 to 2 hours. and then sand off most of what's there. Now, I'll warn you ahead of time, this clogs up sandpaper really quickly, so make sure you have an extra piece or two on hand. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and set that aside. Here I have my fins, and so far they've had one layer of sanding sealer, followed by sanding, followed by a second layer of sanding sealer, and now I'm going to give them their final sanding with some 150 grit sandpaper here. And so I just need to sand the face, get rid of the excess sanding sealer. Alright, then go through and check everything here again. So you can see here I've sanded it off the high points, but the low points you can see kind of a sheen yet there of the sanding sealer, and that's what we're looking for. And then if you want an even smoother finish, you can follow that with some 220 grit sandpaper here. And something that can happen here is that you can get little bits of the polyurethane rolling under here into little balls or little worms. And you just need to clear those off every so often so the sandpaper is actually sanding and not rolling. Alright, so that fin is ready to be glued onto the rocket. I'm going to do the same thing with the other fins, both for the sustainer and for the booster, off camera.